Reading is subjective. We all know this. Sometimes it's not great when your best friend doesn't like the same book as you, so you really can't like talk about it and share it. But at the same time, it's also what makes it so beautiful and what makes certain books linger with you, so much so that sometimes they positively impact your life. You read them at the right place, you really connected with the character, you love an author and then discover all of their other books that they already have out. There's a quote that now replays in your mind countless times. There's so much beauty and power within reading. And so I thought that today I wanted to share 8 different books that have positively impacted me personally. These are books that I feel like have changed me, and I wanted to share the reason why. They're all from different genres. Well, yeah, some of them are kind of different, and hopefully they can positively impact you. So let's go ahead and get into the book recs. There's no real order to this, so I'm just gonna start more on the lighthearted side. This is My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. If you've seen any of my socials, I talk about this book, I feel like once a week. It's almost always featured in a book recommendation video. The reason why for me, I feel like Elena Ferrante is an author that makes me feel really seen. There are things about being a woman, about female friendship, the way that she's able to articulate these experiences, she's just so spot on, and I have not found many other authors that are able to do it the way that she does it. I also feel like this book positively impacted me in the sense that this changed my reading taste. After I read this, it was like a whole new world had opened up into literary fiction. I started reading more from Elena Ferrante. Then I found out about other literary fiction authors. This is a book that kind of opened that door for me into literary fiction, which is my all-time favorite genre, and I love it so much. I'm thinking about reading this for book club. Let me know if you're interested. I'd love to do a reread. If you haven't watched the show on HBO, I highly recommend. I have this book to thank for my current book taste. This book I actually found myself talking about and quoting multiple times, but also at work, which I don't really talk about books at work. However, that book is One Day by David Nichols. I read this a year after the Netflix show had already happened. I remember seeing people's videos reacting to it and crying, but obviously I didn't have the context. I knew before I watched the show I wanted to read the book, and so I did. The funny thing is that what stood out to me in this book is not necessarily the content within it or the characters, which I do love, and like I love the overall message and idea behind it, but the one that I quote time and time again is this book is broken up into 5 parts. The beginning of every part is a quote. I believe the author was reading something and it talked about pulling one day out of the year and the significance behind it, and that kind of trickled into him creating this book. So at the beginning of each of the 5 parts, there's a quote from a different book that goes into this idea. The quote that stood out to me is from Charles Dickens. I think about this quote a lot, not enough to get me to actually read Great Expectations. Maybe that's for another day. I do want to share this quote, and it says, "That was a memorable day to me, for it made great changes in me. But it is the same with any life. Imagine one selected day struck out of it and think how different its course would have been. Pause, you who read this, and think for a long moment of the long chain of iron or gold, of thorns or flowers that would have never bound you, but for the formation of the first link on that memorable day." The quote has become really reflective for me, not just in my personal life, but also in my work life, thinking about how the day-to-day things that we do and how it feels muscle memory, there is a greater impact in it, and it is another link in this long formation of a chain that we're all building. There's so many different chains that we all have and that we've all been building subconsciously. It's a quote that I find myself thinking a lot back to when life feels very mundane and you get caught up in the day-to-day of it all. I loved it so much that it makes me think about the book as a whole a lot more. There's a conversation that Dexter and Emma have, and it also kind of ties into that quote, which I really love. I think about it so often. I've journaled about this quote in relation to like different aspects of my life multiple times, and I find myself throughout the day visually seeing the chain, and while I picture the chain, I'm also simultaneously listening to The Chain by Fleetwood Mac in my mind, which is like a beautiful combination all in all. Clarice Lispector. Now, I was very lucky, and I know this was my very first Clarice Lispector. Read the back and I was like, oh, it's a cute love story. It's this woman and she's talking to this professor. She can recognize that she's able to form connection with children that she works at, but she struggles when she's trying to build that emotional intimacy with adults. I read this when I was in my very early 20s. I'm in my mid 20s now, but like it was around 5-6 years ago for me. I was just not expecting the impact that this had on me, especially with the main character that we're following. She shares a lot about internally what she's struggling with, and like, yes, she feels this connection with this man, but creating that intimacy is really difficult for her. She goes into detail about why, and it was exactly what I felt at that time. Like, it was as if Clarissa Spector crawled into my mind, pulled out how I felt, but then put it so beautifully. And I was like, exactly. The way that I was frantically underlining, highlighting, tabbing, and I thought this was going to be more of like a light read, and it was anything but that, in the best way. And I love when that ends up happening. I could turn to any random page, pluck a quote, and I would be like, yes, exactly. Page 37. We haven't surrendered to ourselves because that would be the start of a long life, and we're afraid of that. We've avoided falling to our knees in front of the first one of us who says, out of love, you're afraid. We haven't been pure and naive in order not to laugh at ourselves, and so that at each day's close, we can say, at least I didn't do something stupid. And that way, we don't feel confused by putting out the light. I don't know about you, but I could never describe something like that. And I really needed it at the time. This was like very beginning of the pandemic. Not only was it the perfect time that I needed to find this book, it also introduced me to Clarissa Spector, and she has become one of my all-time favorite authors ever. It was just the best combination. The camera battery did die. It's charged. We're back. And the next book is Never Let Me Go. This one, along with My Brilliant Friend, are books that I have talked so much about countless times. For the longest time, this book was my favorite book ever. And then I read I Have Never Known Men, which is not in this video. There's so many things that I love about this book, and I feel like every single time I talk about it, I talk about very similar things. There are so many parts of this book that I love, and I feel like every single time I talk about it, I'm always hitting the same marks. And so yes, I love how it focuses on memory, the significance that it has with our loved ones, and like how we dedicate our time and all of that. Yes, and it is really significant in that aspect, but it's also kind of changed the way that I grocery shop. It's difficult to explain why if you haven't read the book. I don't want to ruin it for people that haven't read the book. For those that have, I'm curious if anybody else feels really similar to this. Whenever I go purchase eggs, if I see them in the big white box and it's just like a bunch of white eggs, I will not buy them. I always go for the ones that are pasture raised. It's basically like the black box. Those remind me of this book. And if you have the context, let me know if you feel similarly. And if I can only share one quote in this video, it's from page 120, and it says, because somewhere underneath a part of us stayed like that, fearful of the world around us, and no matter how much we despised ourselves for it, unable quite to let each other go. Recently, this book had its anniversary. It was republished, and in one of the interviews, the author talked about the inspiration for the title, and he was listening to this song, and it is called Never Let Me Go by Bill Evans. I do now have that song on my playlist, and I do listen to it a bunch, but there's so many reasons why I love this book, and I've talked about it in so many videos. I know it's not loved by many people, but it'll always hold such a special place in my heart. And this book has changed my life in the fact that I do not buy my eggs the same way that I did before I read the book. The next two books I'm actually going to group together. They cover the same topic very differently, but I felt really connected to these books. It goes over the topic of grief. At the time in which I read these, I had lost somebody really special to me. It was the first time I had experienced grief to that intensity. I was really struggling to put into words how I felt. And even though when you lose somebody, it impacts everybody who loved that person, it still felt like such an isolated experience, and it felt really lonely. And one of the many reasons why I love reading and why I love books, I connected so much with these two books in particular for how these characters talked about grief. And so the first one, funny enough, is Monstrillo by Gerardo Samano Cordova. This was one of my favorite books of last year. I say funny enough because this is a literary horror. It's inspired by Frankenstein, and we follow 4 different perspectives, but mainly these 2 parents that lose their son Santiago. In one of those moments, the mom goes into his room, cuts open his chest, takes a little part of his lung, and starts feeding it caldito. The lung starts to grow into this little monster that's later called M. Yes, the approach is out there, but at the end of the day, what connected with me is it's these 2 parents that love their child so much. They're really struggling with this grief. They found a way to hold on to their son. And if you had a way to hold on to your loved one, you would. I would, personally. Absolutely. And it just so happened that the way in which they did it, it was like they got a version of their son. It wasn't necessarily their son. And I loved that it just showed this like physical representation of their grief and their pain, even though obviously it wasn't really their son. It's the closest that they had to him. And so it was really difficult for them to let it go. In the very beginning of the book, we follow the perspective of Santiago's mom going through the grief, and the way that she describes described it and how it was so different to her husband. And like, there is no right or wrong way to grieve. This book just really resonated a lot with me, especially the first two perspectives. And I just loved how the author explored this type of grief and this physical representation of the grief. It was done so well, and I really loved it. The other book is more of just literary fiction, and it is called Death Valley by Melissa Broder. This one is quite out there because our main character ends up traveling to the desert. She needs just a moment to get away. Her father's in the hospital. Her husband also has like a chronic illness, or like he's also very sick as well. And so she just feels this like anticipation for grief. She doesn't really know how to express it, what to do, and so she escapes to the desert. She ends up going on a hike and sees this like really big cactus and has this like special interaction with the cactus. Again, it's another book that's out there in a different way. Both of them resonated for me, so I don't know really what that says about me. It was like another way to put into words anticipating grief for a loved one, and you know it's coming. Unfortunately, I was in a really similar situation, and like you feel really conflicted at that time. In page 14, she talks about, I wouldn't say I believe that buying just one more plant will keep my father alive, parentheses, I do, but the language of plants is his language and I want to share it. And funny enough, that was exactly what I did. I didn't have a green thumb, but my loved one did. And so I started buying plants to keep around the home and really focused on nurturing and loving them. And it was like my representation of the person who I had just lost. It's interesting how you can find that connection in a book that's just fiction, especially in a book that has like such an out there premise like this one does. It had so many pockets of peace and resonance with me. I do want to read more Melissa Broder, but that's why Death Valley, particularly for me, was one of my favorites from her. The one nonfiction in this list is The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. I randomly picked this up. I think I saw it on a recommendation video from somebody else. Honestly, I liked the cover. I knew nothing about it, but I do love a good memoir. I would really love to reread this, but just the physical copy so I can add my underlines and my tabs to my favorite sections. This is an incredibly heavy read. Jeanette Walls is talking about her experience with her childhood and how she had a dad that was so loving and caring and present, but yet there was a switch that flipped whenever he started to drink, and he just became like a full 180 version of himself, paired with a mom that was really free-spirited, just wanted to be by herself and didn't always necessarily want to be a mom, didn't have that internal drive, or like in Spanish we say like no le nace. And so Jeanette with her siblings were in this difficult situation where they didn't really have an adult in the home to rely on, to support them, to advocate for them. They found themselves in like really difficult situations because of decisions that their parents had made. They were on the run a lot. It was a really, really heavy childhood. Definitely recommend checking content warnings if you want to read this one. But the reason why this book to me is so significant is Jeanette Walls' resilience. And even though it was a really complicated scenario and it would be natural for somebody to hold some kind of resentment against your parents or frustration or sadness or something, Jeanette was always able to put that to the side and viewed her parents as people, as humans that were trying their best, as people that made mistakes. She never let what happened linger, and she showed a lot of tenderness and grace towards her parents. I will never forget, and I've talked about this so many times. There's people in my personal life that get sick and tired of hearing this story. It was one of the things that stuck out to me, and when I think about this book, I think about that story. Basically, it was Jeanette was with her dad. I think they were like in the car traveling somewhere on the run from something. They spent their Christmas traveling in the car. They had pulled over to the side. It was late at night. They look up at the sky and her dad points and says, look at that star. Do you see how it's shining so bright? I got that star for you. And Jeanette Walls loves this memory with her dad. She recounts it with so much love and admiration for her father. And at the time she was like, I can't believe my dad got this star for me. That's my star. And my dad thought of me when he saw it. She was talking to her other siblings about this experience and she was like, don't you remember when dad did this for us? And their perspective on it was completely opposite. And they're like, oh, that deadbeat, like, yeah, he had nothing else for us. What else was he gonna give us? The same experience to the same siblings in the same household, and that memory holds complete different value for them naturally. But it's one of the stories that I think back to time and time again. This book is high up on my reread list, but I just truly adore it so much. Now, the final book is the most heavy, and it's why I wanted to leave it until the very end. This is a book that I don't recommend. I'm not talking about it to encourage encourage you to pick it up and read it. This one, I think you have to be extremely careful with the content warnings. I know sometimes people don't always look into them and they're just like, no, I think I'll be okay. Please check them before you pick this book up. It is not a light read at all. It's a really, really heavy read. The book is My Dark Vanessa. This is one of the first books actually that I read when I was getting back into reading. I didn't know what it was about. I saw the cover. I was intrigued. I picked it up. I went to the park with my dog. I remember sitting under this like really big tree. It was a beautiful day out and I started reading this book and I was hooked. This book is basically Lolita through the female's perspective. The timeline kind of jumps back and forth. So it's set in 2000 when she is really young. She's in school and she meets this teacher, and then it jumps over to 2017. Obviously she's much older. She has been removed from the situation for some time and she's reflecting on what's happened because in 2017 is when the Me Too movement has started. So we jump a lot through timelines from when she's younger to when she's older. In 2017, it's like the first time that our character has really thought about this relationship, where she's really taking the time to consider everything that's happened and kind of pull this person away from the situation and just evaluate the situation for what it is. The book is extremely detailed. It's really uncomfortable at times. Like that's what it needs to be. You need to feel uncomfortable when you're reading it. And at the same time, I couldn't look away because our main character's journey through this, as she's trying to come to terms with what has happened, towards the end, she is in therapy and she's talking to her therapist about this relationship. At that time, 17 years later, she still viewed it as a love and she still viewed it as something that she chose, as something that was her responsibility, that she mindfully went into it and for all the right reasons, and that he did as well. And so it's really hard to deconstruct something like that internally. And I vividly remember a therapy session. I'm not going to spoil it, but basically all she says is like, this is my life. This has been my whole life. And so to accept that it is anything different from what I've told myself in my head is such a big ask, and it's so heavy and it's much more complicated than what people think. Ultimately, what stood out to me is this different perspective during the Me Too movement. Yes, it's so important to advocate, to share your experience, to form connection and understanding and like mutual support from others. Absolutely, yes. And at the same time, it's also valid if you don't feel comfortable sharing your story. And this is one of the first books that talked about that, shared this perspective of just because it happened to you doesn't mean that you have to say what happened. And it's okay if you don't, because you're working through it internally. Like both of them are okay, because there is no right or wrong way to process what's happened to you. If you don't speak up and share your story, that doesn't negate what's happened to you. And it's one of the most powerful books that I have ever read. But again, it's not one that I talk about a lot because I don't want people to see this video and say, oh yeah, I'm totally gonna pick it up. And if you're not in the right headspace, again, like it's very, very detailed. And I don't think everybody should read this book, but it is a book that personally changed me. Those are all the 8 books that have impacted me. If you've read these, if you're interested in reading them, comment down below, let me know which. And thank you so much for watching.